The fragile peace process between the U.S. and Iran has already encountered its first major test. New fighting between Israel and Hezbollah forced the postponement of high-level negotiations set to begin in Switzerland before a last-minute ceasefire was cobbled together, possibly putting the planned 60-day negotiating period back on track. Now, if you're confused, well, you're in good company. I'll have the details. Just days after the U.S. and Iran signed a 60-day memorandum of understanding, essentially a pause while the two sides attempt to hammer out an agreement over key issues, the fragile peace process has already encountered its first major obstacle. High-level talks between American and Iranian negotiators that were expected to start today in Switzerland have now been postponed after a renewed round of fighting between Israel and Hezbollah threatened to derail the broader diplomatic effort. The delay comes at a particularly sensitive moment. On Sunday, President Trump announced what he described as a breakthrough agreement with Tehran, a memorandum of understanding that halted fighting and launched a 60-day negotiating period aimed at addressing Iran's nuclear program while reopening the Strait of Hormuz to commercial shipping. Originally, Vice President J.D. Vance was expected to travel to Switzerland for what was initially envisioned as a formal signing ceremony. That sounds like fun. However, the Trump administration pivoted, instead having President Trump and Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian individually sign the MOU on Wednesday. After the signatures were finalized, Vance's scheduled Friday trip to Switzerland was reframed as the launching pad for face-to-face technical and peace negotiations rather than a ceremonial signing. White House staff, journalists, and advance teams had already begun preparations, but Vance acknowledged the fluid nature of the discussions, telling reporters Thursday evening, quote, "We think these technical negotiations start sometime this weekend. That's still the plan, but that could change," end quote. And just hours later, well, it did, with the Friday meeting being abruptly called off by the Iranian side. According to both Reuters and the Associated Press, Iranian officials informed mediators they would not move forward with negotiations while Israeli military operations against Hezbollah continued in Lebanon. That position reflects one of the central challenges, of course, facing the broader agreement. While the interim MOU paused direct hostilities between the U.S. and Iran, many of the region's interconnected conflicts remain unresolved. Iran has repeatedly argued that any lasting settlement, and for that matter, this MOU that was signed, must also address fighting involving its proxy Hezbollah in Lebanon. That insistence by the Iranian regime and the U.S. administration's willingness to agree to Iran's demand over that almost guaranteed that there would be trouble with these negotiations. And those tensions flared dramatically Thursday night into Friday. Lebanese officials initially reported at least 18 people killed in Israeli airstrikes, while the AP later reported that the broader exchange killed 47 people in Lebanon. Israel had earlier reported that 4 of its soldiers had been killed in fighting with Hezbollah militants. The escalation immediately raised concerns that the broader diplomatic process could begin unraveling before substantive negotiations had even started. But by Friday afternoon, well, there were signs that the immediate crisis had been contained. American, Qatari, Iranian, Israeli, and Hezbollah-linked sources all confirmed that a new ceasefire had been reached in Lebanon. Hezbollah officials say they were observing the ceasefire, while an Israeli official stated that if Hezbollah refrained from attacks, Israel would also adhere to the terms. And that development appears to have stabilized the immediate crisis, at least for now, though obviously major questions do remain unanswered. As we've been tracking on the PDB, the agreement signed earlier this week intentionally postponed discussion of the most difficult issues, including the future of Iran's nuclear program, Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium, major sanctions questions, and a highly controversial reconstruction fund. Negotiators were given 60 days to work through those disputes and attempt to reach a more permanent settlement. President Trump, in a lengthy tirade on Truth Social on Friday, defended the arrangement after facing criticism from both Democrats and some Republicans who argue that the U.S. may be conceding too much. Trump wrote in part, quote, "The war has diminished Iran. We didn't meet out of desperation. Iran did. they are finished. He put finished in all capitals, so you know that they must be finished. We'll play out the 60 days, he said. They get no money, not 10 cents, end quote. As of Friday afternoon, there's no word on when face-to-face talks between the U.S. and Iran may finally get underway, now that tentative ceasefire is in place between Israel and Hezbollah. But mediators are reportedly actively working to get the negotiations back on track, and the Swiss Foreign Ministry said despite the postponement, they are still prepared to host the U.S. and Iranian delegations. For now, the most important takeaway may simply be that the diplomatic process does remain alive, although somewhat on life support. Now, I would encourage you to check out this weekend's edition of our PDB Situation Report for more on how the Hezbollah situation impacts the overall U.S.-Iran negotiations. Jonathan Schanzer from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies provides some excellent analysis of the conflict and why Iran was so insistent that Lebanon be included in any agreement or memorandum of understanding. You can catch that episode tonight at 10 p.m. on the First TV, and as always, on our YouTube channel. Just wander on over to YouTube and search up at President's Daily Brief. Coming up next, after months of economic pressure, food shortages, and rolling blackouts, Cuba's communist government is making a dramatic course correction. I'll be right back. Hey, Mike Baker here, with an important message for every taxpayer out there. Now, we've all heard the radio ads about the IRS. There, of course, are plenty of those ads and plenty of companies out there telling you to be afraid, and they try to frighten you into calling. But I want to tell you about a company that's different. It's called Tax Relief Advocates. Look, if you owe money to the IRS, whether it's $5,000 or $50,000 or $500,000, hopefully it's not that, TRA, Tax Relief Advocates, has a solution to your tax problem. TRA could reduce or even eliminate what you owe to the IRS. Their passion is taxes and helping individuals and businesses fix their IRS problems. They've got over 1,000 five-star Google reviews and an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau. Look, here's the truth. You do not need to be afraid of the IRS. Generous tax relief programs are now available that can give you a fresh start. So don't wait. Simply visit TRA.com. That's TRA.com, or call the number 800-583-6515. Once again, that's 800-583-6515. Tax Relief Advocates. Real solutions for real people. Hey, Mike Baker here. I want to take just a moment to talk about security, specifically your online security. Look, here's the thing. In a world of data breaches and intrusions, identity theft, and online harassment, keeping your personal life private feels like a full-time job. And if you're like me, keeping you and your family lives private is important. And, of course, in the age of AI, well, we're especially vulnerable to scammers using our personal data against us. Look, if you've ever Googled yourself and you've seen your address or phone number pop up, it is unsettling. And that's where Delete Me comes in. They do the heavy lifting, wiping your family's information from data broker sites. You'll receive regular, personalized reports showing exactly what was found and removed. And Delete Me isn't a one-time fix. It constantly monitors the web so your data stays off the market. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me. Now at a special discount for our PDB listeners. Get 20% off your Delete Me plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/PDB and use the promo code PDB at checkout. Again, the only way to get that 20% off, it's simple. Just go to joindeleteme.com/PDB and enter the code PDB at checkout. Once again, joindeleteme.com/PDB, code PDB. Welcome back to the PDB Afternoon Bulletin. Cuba's communist government has spent decades resisting free market reforms, preferring instead, of course, the slow decay of communism. Now, facing what may be its most severe economic crisis since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Havana appears to be making one of the biggest ideological concessions since Fidel Castro's revolution back in 1959. According to CBS News, Cuban lawmakers on Thursday approved 176 economic reforms aimed at pulling the island back from the brink of collapse. The measures were unveiled by Prime Minister Manuel Marrero during a landmark address to Cuba's National Assembly. The moves represent a dramatic shift for a government that's long maintained tight state control over nearly every aspect of the economy. Among the most significant changes, foreign investors will no longer be required to form joint ventures with the Cuban state. Large private enterprises will now be permitted to operate legally, and both Cuban and foreign investors will be allowed to acquire ownership stakes in state-owned companies, accelerating a shift, theoretically, toward privatization. Daniel Torralbos, a Cuban economist based in London, described the package as the most profound set of economic reforms since Fidel Castro seized power more than 6 decades ago. And the timing is not difficult to understand. Cuba's economy is under extraordinary strain. Power outages lasting more than 30 hours at a time have become increasingly common across parts of the island. Food, fuel, drinking water, and medicine remain in short supply. The UN's High Commissioner for Human Rights has warned that shortages of medical supplies have become so severe that children are reportedly dying because essential treatments are unavailable. Meanwhile, CBS reports that only a single Russian oil tanker has arrived in Cuba since the beginning of the year, leaving the government struggling to secure the fuel needed to keep the country's power grid functioning. The worsening crisis has forced Cuban leaders into a position that would have been politically unthinkable just a few years ago. For decades, Havana has blamed its economic difficulties on the long-standing U.S. embargo. More recently, Cuban officials have pointed to the Trump administration's oil blockade, imposed after the removal of Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro, as a major source of economic pressure. And to be sure, the U.S. pressure campaign appears to be a major factor behind this free market pivot by Cuba's leaders. But even Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel acknowledged this week that not all of the country's problems can be blamed on outside forces. In an unusually candid set of remarks, Díaz-Canel criticized what he described as bureaucracy, inefficiency, and years of delayed economic decisions that have hindered production and investment. As one Cuba expert at the University of Miami told AFP, Cuban leaders now appear to have their backs against the wall, and that pressure has only intensified in recent months. As we've previously discussed here on the PDB, the U.S. has steadily increased pressure on Cuba's leadership. Last month, U.S. prosecutors indicted former Cuban President Raul Castro in connection with the 1996 shoot-down of 2 civilian aircraft flown by a humanitarian group. Before that, CIA Director John Ratcliffe traveled to Havana for talks with senior Cuban officials, signaling Washington's willingness to engage diplomatically while simultaneously maintaining significant pressure on the regime. The Trump administration has also continued to squeeze Cuba economically while openly discussing broader political change on the island. Asked this week whether Cuba had become a higher priority for Washington following the tentative end of the Iran conflict, now that's perhaps an overly optimistic thought, Vice President J.D. Vance said the U.S. wants Cubans to be, quote, happy and successful. Well, that's nice, adding that American officials are currently engaged in discussions with the Cuban government. Cuban leaders, for their part, reject the suggestion that the reforms represent a capitulation to American pressure. Díaz-Canel insisted the measures are intended not to abandon socialism, but to somehow preserve it. In fact, lawmakers concluded the parliamentary session by repeating one of Fidel Castro's most famous slogans, quote, socialism or death, end quote. But moments after reaffirming their commitment to socialism, Cuba's leaders approved some of the most market-oriented reforms in modern Cuban history. Now, whether those reforms arrive in time to stabilize the economy or merely slow the country's decline, of course, that remains an open question. And that, my friends, is the PDB Afternoon Bulletin for Friday, the 19th of June. Now, if you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me at pdb@thefirsttv.com. And, of course, to listen to the show ad-free, well, you can do that. It's very, very simple. Just become a premium member of the President's Daily Brief by visiting pdbpremium.com. And, as mentioned earlier, a brand new spanking episode of the PDB Situation Report drops, as the kids say, this evening at 10 p.m. on the First TV. You can also catch it and past episodes on our YouTube channel. Just search up at President's Daily Brief, as well as on podcast platforms everywhere. I'm Mike Baker, and I'll be back over the weekend with the PDB Situation Report. Until then, stay informed, stay safe, stay cool. Hey, Mike Baker here with a top tip for looking and feeling good all summer long. I mean, that is what I'm known for, right? Look, if you're like me, summer's an active time. You know what I'm talking about. Golf rounds, the beach, lake trips. I love the lake trips. Now, I used to think I had to spend a fortune to find high-performance gear that actually looked and felt good enough to wear all day. And that's why I joined Fabletics as a VIP member. The quality is terrific. It feels like premium high-end activewear that's breathable and built to last. Their Training Day t-shirt is a great example. It lets you go from a workout to travel. It's comfortable and it fits great. Right now, new VIPs get this. Get 70 to 80% off everything. You didn't hear me incorrectly. It's 70 to 80% off everything. Shop now at fabletics.com/PDB to get 70 to 80% off everything when you sign up as a new VIP. Take a quick style quiz and be sure to select PDB when prompted to unlock this offer. It's a limited time offer, so do not wait. Again, that's fabletics.com/PDB for 70 to 80% off everything as a new VIP. Thanks for watching today's briefing. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss one of our daily updates. And don't forget to leave a comment below. We always enjoy hearing your thoughts.